Well, I'll take you back to July of last year. You remember government outlined that 10-point power plan to address the power cuts. Well, that's gone well, hasn't it? Now, some of the details included buying power from independent producers, or IPPs, scrapping of license requirements for private energy projects, and remember this one, importing electricity from Botswana and Zambia. Then we went on to go have the worst year of blackouts to date. It was around 200 days. Well, this year doesn't exactly look like it's getting much better either. So what exactly has gone wrong? Well, let's hear then from senior researcher at the Centre of Risk Analysis, Chris Hattingh, very kindly joining us again on the show. And Chris, it doesn't seem that long ago we had this hopefulness from the president that maybe there was a plan. There was a 10-point plan, we were told. If I had to give you a list of 10 points, how many of those would you tick have actually come to fruition?
Good morning, Gareth. Always great to have the opportunity to discuss these very important matters with you. Earlier on, you were talking about doing math calculations. I'm glad I'm not sitting in an Eskom control room having to decide which section of the grid gets what section of power exactly. So I was speaking about the 10-point plan. I don't think any of them can be considered a success, can be a proper green tick. Maybe some of them have been left on red, as it were. If you look at, for example, scrapping the requirements to obtain a license to generate your own electricity, build your own projects, you still need, for example, a permit from NERSA. So there's still lots of bureaucracy for you to go through. Looking at buying power from IPPs, for example, lots of bureaucracy and red tape. I think at the moment that 10-point plan and Eskom's problems in general boil down to two things. That's bureaucracy and red tape on the one hand, and secondly, sort of ideological commitment to the view that the state needs to provide for all of our electricity needs. And at the moment, despite what the president says, his best intentions, maybe the best intentions from ministers, from others in government, they run into implementation problems on the ground. You've got vested interest groups fighting with each other. You've got coal mafias, all that sort of stuff creating this perfect storm. So you can have great plans on paper, but if you don't have that hard-nosed attitude on the ground to break up a lot of these issues, I don't think we're going to see a serious turnaround anytime soon.
Of those 10 points, what do you think would have been the easiest for us to achieve? I'll tell you what mine is, because logically it made more sense, because people on social media and even people I run into when we talk about this keep asking, why do we keep exporting our power to other countries? Why don't we cut that off? Sorry about your problems in your country. And B, import the power that we're exporting. That seemed to have been the easiest one. That's the one that got the most attention. I'm not even sure if that's happened.
No, as far as I'm aware, it hasn't happened. There are contractual commitments from Eskom's side and between the South African government and other governments to ensure that what was promised in contracts and agreements is delivered upon. Now, of course, you can exit contracts as with any other normal business transaction, for example, your phone contract, all that sort of stuff, but you need to put the steps in place. You can't just do it sort of overnight. So one wonders, was this just said as to score points in the public sphere, or has it actually been implemented to ensure that we can not dispatch power to other countries and make sure that we cater to our own needs first? That's a serious consideration. I would also say one of the other points that I thought was sort of low-hanging fruit that could be easier done is just making sure that people can install solar in their homes. So you had, for example, last year as part of the 10-point plan, but also other plans, you had this idea of incentivizing greater uptake of rooftop solar, and Eskom would develop rules and a pricing structure known as a feed-in tariff. Now, from what I'm aware, Eskom hasn't done this from their side. I think President Ramaphosa tried to push maybe from his side and open this up and promise this to the country, but it's simply not happening. If you had that sort of thing implemented, you could then take pressure off of Eskom to focus on at least refurbishing and upgrading some of its main coal power plants to provide electricity to citizens who really can't afford to generate on their own through rooftop solar, for example. But then you could have more middle upper class to upper class suburbs building their own rooftop solar, taking pressure off of Eskom's own supply. I think those sorts of things would mean over the longer term that Eskom at least can focus on its basic service provision versus trying to provide for every single citizen in the country.
And I suppose the problem is now, when we talk to experts like yourself, Chris, and you're in the world of risk analysis, what does this analysis look like? What's the risk of our country? What's the risk of the grid? Wherever you'd like to take the risk here, it's all up to you for the year. If we don't get what seemed like a very easy 10-point plan, what risk does our country face right now?
So I think we should keep in mind always the seen and the unseen with these sorts of issues. So for most of us, we experience power cuts day to day, and that means inhibitions in business activity, less ability to move around for citizens who rely on trains, for example, that sort of thing. But also the unseen, so the effects on food prices, for example, on inflation. We've often talked about the Reserve Bank, how they've tried to keep a handle on inflation through monetary policy. Well, they can only do so much. If we've got consistent power cuts, that affects the value of the rand, which means citizens, especially poor citizens, their money doesn't go as far as it used to. They can't afford basic foodstuffs like they used to for farmers and miners. I mean, with farming and mining being two of South Africa's biggest lights in the economy, as it were, those get impacted as well. Our exporters can't export as much as they did before. I think if we stick with stage 2 to 3 load shedding on average, then we've got a cap of 1.5% GDP growth this year. That again means less opportunities for businesses to flourish and build and create jobs. If we've got consistently stage 4, 5, and 6, then I think we might be lucky if we reach 1% growth this year. We've got about, I think last year, between 50 to 100 billion rand in terms of production loss over last year because of load shedding. So all this filters in to economic activity and makes it more difficult for citizens to just go about their daily lives and try and make a better living for themselves. In the context of a global environment, which is also experiencing low growth, I think that'll impact even more negatively on us. So I think quite a tough year ahead, tough times ahead. Eskom's own projections, they don't foresee that even by 2027, they will have resolved load shedding. So for those people who can afford to go off grid to some extent, I would advise that it's probably a good time to invest in that sort of thing right now.
Yeah, if you have the money to do it, because maybe it's just me, but I'm noticing the prices of these things are skyrocketing as well. But Chris, it's always great talking to you. I always appreciate your time. Chris Hattingh joining us here on the South African Morning, of course, senior researcher at the Centre for Risk Analysis, and it's not looking good. And bearing in mind, you then bring in the issue that we had with COVID-19, how much the economy was slammed by that. The worst year of blackouts last year, and this year is not looking very good either. And then, of course, we're over in Davos, Team South Africa at the World Economic Forum. The president not even going over to try and woo investors. He had to stay here to try and deal with the issue. So it's really not looking very, very good at all. But my thanks to Chris Hattingh this morning.